I'm going, I think, from the record, as well as it's my pleasant duty to formally introduce Pat Rogers. And so I'm going to do that anyway, even though you all know it. Because I think we are being recorded as well. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome Pat Rogers, who is the school's visiting Professorial Fellow this year. It's a double pleasure for me, having had a recent joint lecture with Louis Sinclair in English, and now to host another English event. Pat Rogers is the Department of English at the University of South Florida, Tampa. He's a distinguished university professor, and that's a distinguished with a capital D, both I think in its title and clearly in his background as well. Holder of the Bartlett Chair in Liberal Arts. He's taught all over England and Wales before going out to the States. He's been a fellow in Cambridge, a visiting fellow in Oxford and in Otago. He's a fellow of the Royal Historical Society, a corresponding fellow of the English Association, and a corresponding fellow of the British Academy. His teaching covers just about everything from the 17th to the 20th centuries, concentrating on his research more, which focuses on the long 18th century. All aspects of that, from literature and politics to medicine, science and more, where he's of course particularly welcome in the Institute of English Studies is his interest in the history of the book and descriptive bibliography. He's recently been working on the Roman publisher Edmund Curll, which is what he's going to talk about today. But he's written 11, or written and edited 11 books on Pope, numerous books on Johnson and Defoe, Jane Austen, and so on and so forth. So we really are, I remember being on the committee that made this appointment, of course, and we're absolutely delighted to award Pat Rogers this school visiting Professorial Fellowship. And to him.
Thank you very much. This is my last chance, so I'd just like to thank you as former Dean to convey to the present Dean and to all the people in the school and in the Institute my gratitude for allowing me. It's a great honour and great pleasure to come here. Okay, I'm going to spend about 10 or 15 minutes just saying a little bit about Curll's fortunes and particularly the surprising rise in his reputation in recent years. And then the rest of the time, about 20-25 minutes, just taking you through the catalogue which Bob Baines and I have trying to compile of his publications. But before that, well, you know who Curll is.
No.
In fact, well, some of you probably know almost as much about his life as Paul and I do. Paul, by the way, is now being a British academic on the point of becoming head of school and has been deputy head. So the last 2 or 3 years I've had to try and give it along, but our interest goes back intensively on the catalogue for a decade. In Paul's case, probably longer than that. In my case, BCE, really, forever. Curll, we think now, was born in 1683, though nearly all the reference books still say 1675, which was once the best guess, but no longer. But we don't know where he was born, despite digging around in record offices for decades. We don't know who his father was or mother. It says his father was a tradesman. We found his 2 marriages, but we don't know much about the brides, and we don't know when the first wife died. We know that his son Henry, who was to succeed in business and worked with him, died before Curll made his final will and gave a little doggerel account of his life and his fortunes. So the biographic record outside the book history record is pretty thin. We don't have any of his accounts. There aren't too many 18th century publishers, but we do have good business records. One or two printers like William Bowley, not too many booksellers. So we have to really put the story together from external evidence, from his publications and so on, and his dealings. A few of his trade sales survive, but not very many of those. Not many entries in the stationer's register because he was not a member of the company. He was, in fact, a cordwainer. The three ways you probably know he could become a member of the livery, either by patrimony, and his father, we don't think, belonged to any company, by apprenticeship, which he did not do, at least as a bookseller, or by payment, and he qualified by payment. And that is one thing that makes him a little bit of an outsider in his career, that he's not a member of the main trade organisation. Okay, now turn to his reputation. You will know that the publishing industry in general, its reputation soared in recent years, owing a great deal to the creation of a discipline, Histoire du Livre, history of the book founded by Roger Chatier, Daniel Roche, Robert Darnton and others. An academic respectability, once achieved, seems to ensure that the object of study acquires a good name of its own. And today this esteem cloaks the most bedraggled colporteur of soft pornography, dodging the authorities in Neuchâtel or Whitefriars, as well as the great publishing dynasties who set up shop in the Boulevard Saint-Germain or Pall-Mall. Small private presses have attracted their devoted bibliographers, and in an era when the big bad wolf of multinational conglomerates threatened to take over the industry, who could be afraid of the Hogarth press? Journals specialising in history publishing began to spring up, and with the rise of electronic aids, a growing number of trade archives became accessibility online. But respectability has its limits, surely. Could anything rescue the most slippery customer of all? It was good to discover the anonymous toilers in pre-revolutionary France, sneaking out their libelle, cunning scandalous, as part of a grand project, collectively to throw down the old regime. But this line of defence would do nothing to raise the stature of the rascally bookseller Edmund Curll, who more than anyone else dragged his professional disrepute. In 1927, the author of an amusing biography, Ralph Strauss, chose an apt-looking title, The Unspeakable Curll. Nobody then considered this a misnomer. After all, this year marked the bicentenary of a trial in the King's Bench, which dispatched Curll to the pillory. Not, by the way, for obscene libel, as wasn't stated, but for a political offence. By general agreement, no better than a wild boy, he deserved all he got for the harsh way he treated his stable of starving writers. In the old Cambridge History of English Literature, he represented, quote, the nadir of the profession. Yet even Curll has begun to prosper mightily. 80 years on, we dare to speak his name with approval. Articles and websites now trumpet his virtues. The debate whether he should be placed among the heroes or villains of Grub Street. The worst of publishers has become, in some quarters, a standard bearer of the freedom of the press. Couldn't be a light Leslie beneficiary of this new history book. Of course, his reputation has encountered warmer breezes because of global changes in the climate of historiography. As Keith Thomas has written, quote, every aspect of human experience from sport now has its historians, from childhood to old age, from dress to table manners, from smells to laughter, from sports to shopping, from barbed wire to masturbation. This represents good news to the publisher of Onanism Displayed. It's possible to suggest specific reasons why Curll might have gained from a programme chiefly bent on rescuing worthy members of the trade, such as Thomas Cadell or George Smith. Most of the recuperative moves that have lifted him out of his former dignity are dependent, in fact, on half-truth, illusion, fable, outright error. In the first place, a tendency has grown up to regard Curll as a rebel. Qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un homme breveté, asked Camus, and he naturally didn't state an answer. The term meant, he declared, un homme qui dit non, given the possibility that it included de Gaulle among other resistors. True, Curll often found himself cast as a naysayer in an oppositional stance, but generally because he'd failed in his efforts to win the support of powerful interest groups. More than once, the authorities turned the heat on him, and Curll promptly shocked his colleagues, even informing against so inoffensive figure in the trade as Samuel Richardson, in his capacity as printing on Once carted off to jail, Curll's first instinct was to drop as many printers and booksellers as he could into trouble, with the aim of negotiating his own release. Thus, in 1724, he told Prime Minister Walpole that De la Riviere Manley had a new installment ready of her notorious bestseller, The New Atlantis. Despite Mary's intuitive motives for impugning what he called a libel, as it never managed to get a share in this lucrative work, though he did pass off a number of books completely unrelated to the original, with titles such as The Northern Atlantis or The German Atlantis. When Manley died later that year, Curll promptly got out an edition of her semi-autobiographical Adventures of Ravelli, misleadingly titled Mrs. Manley's History of Her Own Life and Times, which it wasn't. So keen did the bookseller become a machinery informer, he actually proposed to Walpole some form of reward for himself. He'd been told he might, quote, depend on having some provision made for him in return for his unwearied diligence to serve the government, and that he would expect to be given something in the post office. The Secretary of State, Lord Townsend, had assured him he would recommend me to your honour for some provision in the civil list. In the stamp office, I can be serviceable. Curll did not have in mind a job as a county clerk. It meant that he would manage the oversight of the press and winnow out seditious publications. When forced into a tight corner, he proclaimed his affection to government and denied knowledge of suspect material. Neither was there one copy seen or sold in my shop, used unconvincingly to assert on the authorities' government. But all this while, it now turns out, he was voting against ministerial candidates in the City of London elections, to which he was eligible as it was called. A decade later, he tried again and sent the Treasurer, still headed by Walpole, a proposal to appoint an inspector to look after the stamp duty and bring the government an additional £10,000 a year that was currently evaded by those who were producing ballads and pictures and music. Hardly a record of a man who would die in the last ditch for freedom of speech with the words of Areopagita on his lips. The sign of the Times, what I'm talking about, comes with a paper by Janine Barchas, presented in 2006 at the Sharp Conference. This is the one which sets up for debate, quote, heroes and villains of Grub Street, Edmund Curll and Samuel Richardson's shared business practices, and suggests that the 18th century book trade was in fact far less polarised in practice than conventional accounts suggest. All well and good, provided we remember a few things. Richardson did not obfuscate the publishing history of his books by altering titles or dates, or issue spurious editions of a work simply by inserting a cancelled title page, as Curll did on literally scores and scores and scores of components at the time. Unlike Curll, he did not invent bogus authors with names resembling the great Joseph Gay, one of his favourite authors, or rigged publicities that suggest that Addison was responsible for the book when only a brief paragraph by the preface can sometimes be nasty. He did not engage in a variety of duplicitous practices by which Curll conceived his involvement and misrepresented the circumstances under which a work was issued. He did not advertise old books with a pretense of originality. It took a Curll to do these things and to exploit many similar devices year in, year out. We'll see some of this later. So they were both booksellers, but they were both booksellers in the sense that Cecilia Bartley and Amy Whitehouse are both singers. A second reason for this surge in popularity lies in the famous quarrel with Pope. On a variety of grounds, some understandable enough, Pope has long excited hostile reactions, and today he's often portrayed as a traitor to the literary brotherhood who fouled his own nest by savaging writers and publishers in the dance articles. For some modern commentators, they discover that he himself, Pope, operated close to Grub Street. One writer says, Pope himself was not above using deception, trickery and chemistry to get the better of Curll. It's easy for us to see that Curll was acting large authority, he quotes, by printing poems, letters and other material he neither paid for nor received payment permission for. But as Curll himself asked, quote, who gives you the authority of punishing me? End quote. This writer, John O'Brien, got his students, graduate students in America, to take part in a mock trial, setting poet against jury, against bookseller before a student jury. The jury returned what he thought was, quote, a splendid and appropriate verdict, finding both men culpable of wrongdoing and sentencing them to be placed in the stocks in spitting distance of each other. The students, he says, were able to articulate the issues in great detail and complexity, and when the opportunity came, cross-examined each other shrewdly. It does not appear that the issues under review extended, for instance, to the degree of literary merit. And then another teacher, Bradley K. Much, enlisted graduate students in a class on research methods to assist in a project involving 18th century liberty in literature. He reports that members of the class, quote, eagerly transcribed Venus in the cloister of the nun in her smock as a way to sharpen their knowledge of textual criticism. Perhaps the first time such a motive has led anyone to peruse this infantile piece of pornography. After this, the students, enthusiastic about justifying the words of Edmund Curll to man, planned an edition that would appeal to a modern reader. Curll would surely have approved this scheme since he craved respectability and success. This points to a third factor which has abetted the publisher's rehab program. Curll's heavy involvement in soft pornography has become a positive asset, and his willingness to take on authorities is now seen as another blow for freedom of the press. Some might think it a pity he did not challenge the limits of the law with something more substantial than Venus, or his tracts on impotence, flagellation and sodomy, mostly inferior translations of flimsy items written decades earlier and not very exciting to read. But at least he took on the mighty establishment and drew out the full retinue of the government's legal officers. It was really a political book, though, which embarrassed Walpole's ministry, which earned him his time on the rostrum at Charing Cross in 1728. In any case, now that both erotic texts and popular culture have come to seem more worthy of study in many quarters than distinguished literature, Curll's stock could hardly fail to move upwards. A few of his smutty books have been reprinted with full scholarly apparatus in Pickering Chatter's edition of 18th century British erotica, 2002, suggesting he may be in line with the day for posthumous pardon from the Royal Society of Literature. Readers could excuse for thinking that Curll played the part of a Maurice Jarodiac in pushing back the boundaries of artistic expression. Sadly, he produced nothing comparable to the ginger man, the Maker's Lunch, or the Legion. Instead, his legacy was to make the world free for Roger Fuqua new description of Maryland and a tract called De Secretis Miliarum, text equally bereft of literary merit and medical value. But, in any case, we did not have to wait until the 21st century to recognise that Curll and Pope were locked in a symbiotic dance. The bookseller himself liked to point out that there is reciprocal need. He often inserted little vaunting rhymes into his editions of Pope. Quote, a fitter couple sure were never hatched, some married are, but we are matched. In the same way, a colleague in the trade, named Thomas Paine, who often shared an imprint, brought out a Paris-Louis epistle to Burlington in 1731, and he too bedecked his newspaper ad with a slick couplet. It is impossible the air should part, Pope has the public ear, and Curll their heart. Most likely Curll wrote these lines. Modern commentators who declare that the two antagonists were as bad as one another have an ancient precedent to claim it goes back to Curll himself. Finally, it happens that the bookseller had a gift of comedy, and much of his career played out itself first as pathos and then as farce. Strauss's biography confirmed this impression of a genial master of ceremonies, cooking snooks and manages of a rigid age. In fact, many of Curll's letters to the authorities, when he found himself in trouble, veer between a vein of peck-sniffing smugness and a deep vein of self-pity. Nor did the hacks he employed always find funny when he doled out 4 or 5 guineas for the labour. That was the rate at which Robert Sambo worked for translating marketable items such as eunuchism and display and the praise of drunkenness. Okay, just to end this little bit. Nearly 50 years ago, Franklin Ian Watt wrote an essay, Publishers and Sinners, The Augustan View. This remains, I think, in some ways the most receptive analysis of the topic today. In it, Watt explored aspects of the new marketplace in books and the frequently hostile response of writers to the practice of developing trade. His conclusion was that Pope and other alarmists were in a sense right. Something like Saint-Beur's Littérature industrielle, 1839, was coming into being. He actually referred to Pope's own gallant stance in the face of this, a phrase rendered almost unimaginable today by the imperial growth of book history and the tendency to justify the works of even sleazy commercial operators. It has become an act of temerity to point out that Curll didn't really make any significant contribution to the development of publishing literature if you exclude instant cut and paste biographies and jumbled centres made up of unsold sheets derived from last season's turkey. Some paradoxical phrases can deliquesce into routine and meaningless couplets. Thus, lovable rogue, which is applied to Ronald Biggs and people in that kind, has lost almost all force of oxymoron because the first word undermines the second. To speak of Edmund Curll in this way is to upsize some accidental features of his career and blot out the rest. It does no service to history publishing to confer a spurious legitimacy on one of the least scrupulous practitioners. Okay, now a great change of gear, a disjuncture really, because despite all I said, which is partly of course provocation and constraints, he clearly was a very prominent and salient person of his time who had important dealings with Britain and Western writers, and also reprinted a lot of important literary and historiographic and antiquarian books from previous speakers. So, despite all I said, I think he's worth study. The main problem has been, though, that it's such a bibliographic mess. I know Strauss did a surprisingly good job in 1927. A lot more remains to be done. Is that large enough to be legible? I'll just summarise some of the points I'm going to. Paul and I have tried to scan surviving copies from all over the world. Strauss doesn't seem to have gone beyond the British Museum Library as it then was. He didn't even go to find his way to Oxford, let alone to big repositories elsewhere in Britain, copyright libraries, and of course he never went to America. And that's understandable at this time. We have found such a unique copy in the University of Otago, things of this kind. So that's one way we're trying to, I'm now making a few vaunting claims, but we're trying to do something more. It gives a much fuller description. Strauss just lists titles, including basic physical features, collation and so on. Gives a full transcript of the title, price. Then it tries to discriminate between real editions and many fictitious ones, illuminating numerous ghosts which appear in Strauss's list. We think that probably 100 to 150 of the items that Strauss noted in advertisements were simply inventions. A few possible, but many of them he just, if he got a book that hadn't sold well enough last week, he simply announced their second edition. No second edition has ever been found anywhere in these cases. And I think in many cases they are certainly coasts. Its entries, some of these I'll go through into more detail in a moment. The entries explore many co-publication arrangements. So you see the amount of cooperation with colleagues. Newspaper advertisements and magazine lists, come to these again, have been more systematically scanned. Again, Strauss only had the British Library, British Museum Library, holdings to go on. Then it supplies a serial number for each item, chronologically year by year, so there is a single precise reference, whereas Strauss is only listed for booksellers, antiquarian booksellers, collectors, and librarians have always done this, simply put Strauss 276, but that might have 20 books on it, page number. So we're trying to provide a unique number, which is of course a big change from where that now. Then cross references to the main bibliographical sources such as Fox and the STC. Tries to establish that the most important thing is supply a full publishing history, because it's constantly moving items from one volume to another. That's one of the problems. And then it says here, I think it contains 14 indexes, it's now 16. We're coming to these. And these is the current context. The asterisk are simply those who are, and this is me doing this, done. So there's the main catalogue, Dubia, which we probably won't include all Strauss's ghosts because there are just too many things that we think about ghosts have been assigned in the past. Then these various indexes. The author's edited and translated, I put less than 500. That is an overestimate because I've done the first third and arrived at a total and multiplied by 3, and a very foolish step, because I realised in the remaining 2/3 of the remaining book already listed. That was a very elementary error in haste. Probably more like 350 to 400 authors. Bibliographical listings, I may have got that. That's in things like the Gentleman's Magazine and things like Canned, Monthly Review, Monthly Catalogue. Then some of the others I'll show you brief excerpts of the entries, so we needn't go through them all. I think this is vital for it. This is one of the reasons, by the way, something you might want to talk about when I finish, why we think it's better probably as a print edition than as online. There are arguments both ways, and if we could get it published either way, we would take it to the online publisher. There'd be a tremendous amount of scrolling back and forward if you had it online. With good printed indexes, we think you can do, as it were, 2 fingers. You don't need to be teaching through tremendous amount of things all at once. And then you see the various other categories, such as I've added the index of wills, because that wasn't always big man was publishing the wills of the recent deceased. Okay, I won't stop longer on that.
Could I just ask, 20 publishing addresses?
Yeah.
That's within London?
Yes.
And how many of them were real? I mean,
all of those, I think.
So was he
I'm actually going to show you the
was he okay. Was he shifting his press around all the time?
He wasn't a printer, he didn't have a press.
He
was never a printer.
Okay.
It's retail, it's basically a retail bookseller. So he moved shop.
Okay.
So I'll give you some.
Okay, good.
Sorry. This is his yearly output, and if you can read it, sorry, I should read 1706. It's got squeezed out on the left-hand side when he started. And I won't linger on this too. You notice there's a big curve. Rachmaninoff said that a climax should come 3/4 away through a career, through a piece. His climax comes a quarter of the way through, around 1714, 15. There's a very simple reason. These, I think it would be agreed by people studying the subject, around the time of the Hanoverian accession and the First Jacobite Rebellion was a big spike in output, over 1,000 separate publications, possibly for the first time, a total which I think was not reached again until the 1760s and 1770s. So it was globally a big spike in publication.
In titles. In titles, not necessarily output.
Sorry, or
You're using
in
titles.
titles, in works. Sorry.
Yeah, work.
Yeah, correct. It goes down 1720 of South Sea Valley. Didn't do much on the Bible, but you might expect it. It goes down, I think, partly for reasons of his being in prison quite a lot in the mid-1720s. Why so early in 1730, I have no idea, after a big push with the Lanciad in 1728. And then mostly it's a decline story. 1740-41 go up because he found Roger Fuckwell's Maryland, treating the female bodies as an atlas, as a map. In 1745 he was publishing several editions of a Hanoverian mock prophecy. And he dies out. There's one publication, is the year he died, December 1747. We think he was blind, probably totally blind again. Can't be absolutely certain. Okay, this is the form of entries at the moment in rough form. They're in draft, and I think they're mostly fairly obvious things. We do not go in for very heavy duty bibliography in the sense of press figures, catchwords, running heads. It's fairly stripped down description, just enough to give the main details of the title page and the physical state of it. And this is often very, very hard to assemble. Often no two copies are alike, as bad as the first folio. He binds things in completely random order, even when they were apparently sold as bound rather than stitched. They can come in any order, shifts things around. Second editions also vary the order for no obvious reason. Contents will come at the start, introduction, at the end of the book, or at the end of the introduction. In one case, at least, in the middle of the book. But that just in shambles, isn't it? Dedication in the middle. Okay, again.
So now putting in format. Or are they all on paper?
No, we do code format, it's not stated
Yeah,
here.
so don't say this.
So it should be. Very common is Octavian Falls.
Yeah.
That is one of them, not usually for long books, but for his stock pamphlets.
Yeah.
That's the most common form. Sorry, that's an omission. As I said, this was in draft. And there's a very simple case. That's a duodecimo. Some are much longer, much more complicated, but it's a complete title page. Certain abbreviations always used, such as PF for parentheses. EC is used throughout to mean E.Curll. Capital E dot, capital C, Curl with two L's. If there's any other spelling or variant, it is given. But if that is the form, it is used C. And it is a cross-reference to where it came from, 1715, 1573.
Who is HC to be published next week?
Oh, sorry, that's Henry Curl's son.
Okay, thanks.
That's the only other person who has it fitting in the first abbreviation. And this is another relatively simple one. Again, the most important thing is probably to relate it to cross-reference to the other places that appear in the house. And follow these kind of wandering through from one thing. Pope's poem, The Worms, which is, I think, the poem that was most frequently reprinted in Pope's lifetime. Curll reprints in about 12 different places. Sometimes in the same setting, sometimes not. Okay. There will be probably additions to some of these. Oh, that's completely legible. That's a thing called, that's one of the very latter ones. Oh, here's the first page of the imprint one, which goes on for another page or two. This is chronological. He starts out in the Strand, goes back to Fleet Street. Oh, he had actually worked for a man, he wasn't apprenticed from Uncle Smith in Paternoster Row. So in a way, then he goes to Strand, Fleet Street, has a shop in Townbridge Town, ends up in Strand, and then we haven't got this, but in fact he then moved to the Bow Street, Covent Garden, Russell Street area. And this is in a way the trend, I think the trend was going this period, moving from the historic centre in Paul's Churchyard to Gloucester Road, moving down to the city in the Strand, and then collecting around Covent Garden in the theatrical area, in the kind of Red Light Place area, of course, in the law students area, and that was the trajectory. For a long time he was up there, you know, it's quite near King's College or somewhere in the Strand, just to the west of where Kingsway, along which comes out of the Strand. There's a street called Catherine Street, which goes up towards Theatre Roger Gurley that way.
Yeah.
He was on the Strand on the south side, right opposite there.
But most of those addresses, apart from the last one, are outside the City of London. Is that right? So, but he is able to operate within the City of London, and therefore come under the jury. And Paternoster wouldn't work.
Well, he was dodging that. It's only for a very short time he goes to.
So he is outside
Could be
the
illicitly,
jurisdiction of the Lord Mayor of London.
Yeah. But he wasn't, that may have been his intention, but as you know, he wasn't alone in there. His shop in Fleet Street is very near Brendan Zintott's.
Who was a reputable publisher.
Yes, not the very highest, but and his shop further along, when he was a bit further along in the Strand, was very near Jacob Thompson's. But yeah, it's a good point to make. In fact, he's kept outside the jurisdiction. This is crossing an out parish. Brides, Dunstan's. Okay, and so it's out ward. I mean, it's Farringdon Ward without. That's probably too small to read. These, it doesn't matter. The details don't matter. These are some of the publishers and printers with whom he worked. You probably can't read it, but the biggest there is one called Arthur Bettisworth, who was some New High Church publishers on the town. The one he was most associated with, we know, with the books that we know Curll was involved in, is the trade publisher James Roberts, and that is a wholesale distributor of video and copyrights. He didn't buy the books off. He was the biggest publisher in that sense. And many of Curll's works only have Robert's name in Hebrew, but we know that Curll was the person who paid for it. So that's not uncommon. Robert's was all of it. And there were perhaps over 120 items each Roberts was associated with. Is in the now there was an entitled paper really Curll's pulling the strings. He was never a member of one of the established conjurers. Oh, it's got very dim. I'll see that name.
How many different titles have you identified? Or how many numbers? How many numbers?
Items. It's just short of 1,200. Without the zero. Again, you can't read this, but all it is on the left-hand side is our index number. Bottom right, sorry, the first number, the left-hand column is the ESTC number. First the N's and the T's, and then on the right-hand side is our corresponding index number. Done by according to the ESTC number. We found about probably 60 items which are not in that precise state edition or issued in the ESTC. Most of them have trivial differences. This is also fairly. These are newspaper advertisements. The ones he does most in are actually not on this page. We've got a lot there for the Daily Courant, that's a very dull newspaper. The Daily Journal, there were rather more. He had phases of choosing one outlet and then another, and one organ rather than another, and then moving on to another. So I forget how many.
Where were the London newspapers located in those days? Were they also in Fleet Street, or?
They were spread about, but there was a big group in Whitefriars off the East End of
Oh, okay, yeah.
just below level 38 Circus now.
Yeah.
A lot were published there. So, some in the Sublime, not I think in some in the city. So I think there's not a big difference.
So he was constantly sending one of his clerks out with an advert and paying cash for it, presumably. There were no, as it were, bank transactions, I imagine, for things like that. How much did an advert cost?
Oh,
Does anyone know?
Yes, there is a figure quoted. I think it's about 5 shillings for 3 insertions or something.
Yeah.
That's out of the top of my head, but there was a small figure like that. I think you might
That's
have
not a
got...
small figure. 5 shillings is a week's wages.
You might have, on a longer deal, if you had 30, kept doing it day after day, week after week, which some publishers did. Curll was not the biggest single advertiser. Some people in his period actually do more advertising. He's more notable for the cheeky things he does, and the sort of novelty, the narratives and poems he sticks in. In fact, he doesn't advertise books at all, as heavily as some others. And sometimes there was obviously some kind of a template where they use the standard time. Curll tends to alter as in the light of this event. So if he's advertising something against Pope and something's happened in their battle, he'll put in a word or two in the middle of the ad, taking account of what's happened in the last day or two, to keep the public abreast of the running battle. He says such good numbers. That's the Foxton Index number on the left and our number on the right. This is not in Strauss, and we have a lot of those, which I think is worth recalling because people do still use Strauss. It's the main version. I suppose that is dispensable. These are the ones about works and things like the Mental Catalogue and the News magazine. Let me just go back to the contents. Yeah, it's got some blur something like that. Doesn't look like that on my screen now. The thing we missed out. There are, I think it says 120 books or so not in Strauss. What did you ask me about the number of places he was imprints?
Yes, 40
Yeah.
I think it says.
Right. Some of those quite briefly. Can you get that bigger?
Yeah.
The slide, bottom right, the sliding thing on the toolbar, further over. Yeah, that should zoom.
Put it down onto that.
Well,
Where it says minus to plus, if you can get that thing, there you go. It's only on 70% at the moment. No, a bit further along, That's better.
Okay, so thanks.
Yeah.
I did try and zoom it, and it zoomed at home, but it didn't zoom in. I tried to save it in Zoom form, but it doesn't work. I think one of the things came up, that's why I came back to this.
The Geriner references attacks on Pope.
Yeah.
How long did their quarrel continue, and how often, how many individual items were produced as a result of it? Was it a 10-year or a 20-year dispute? Were there weekly, monthly? Or?
Well, there are times when it's very, very intense and almost daily at the time of the publication, because letters in 1735 Empire, for instance, or the town of Danzig.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are brief intermissions, and
Was Curll publishing Pope's works without Pope's permission?
well, it's another big question I haven't gone into. Just to answer the first point
Yes,
first,
sorry. Yeah.
they start really about 1714. The first big flurry is 1716, and then they're at it in one or another until Pope's death in 1744. And then there is a life of Pope, published in 1745, the first big, longish life of Pope, which has generally been attributed to Curll. And again, it's very difficult to decide that simple matter. Some things in it are very clear, and he had been announcing for years and years that the person was going to bring out a life of Pope. Some things that don't square look as if somebody got at it, not Curll. So I'm not sure about that. But anyway, for 30 years essentially. And the number of items that relate to it, many are attacks on Pope, of course, or that use Pope, make jokes about him, dedicate books to Pope, bring in little couplets of Pope for no reason is probably maybe 80 to 100. The number that are squarely in the controversy, probably no more than about, I don't know, 15 or 20. Then there's the matter of piracy. Most people have talked of Curll as a pirate. There's currently an American scholar, Stephen Carlin, has argued that most of Swift's things he produced were not released. And it's certainly true that in both those cases, and probably with Matthew Prior, who published quite a lot, there was some complicity on the part of the author. The author allowed the manuscript to get abroad, knowing it would reach Curll. In some cases, as we Pope's letters, we know that he deliberately sent the manuscript to Curll. Or predictions, in fact, on the manuscript, I guess. So in many cases, there's no doubt that Curll was justified in proclaiming his innocence. On the other hand, most of the stuff he published by Addison, most of the stuff he published by Prior, a lot of material, he certainly did not have a mission. He certainly never paid. In those cases, he didn't pay anything, even if he Pope had been complicit in getting the manuscript to him on the Curll. So versa.
So are we in the discussion?
I think we've kind of segued into it.
Yeah. Because I mean, this is fascinating, but I think the point we're now on with Brian is the one that I would be pressing on, that say it's unique, but what are the conditions within which he was able to do this? I mean, there are various jurisdictions, there are various legislative frameworks, there are rules to do with what's pornography, there are rules to do with what are apprenticeships. Most of your account, if I can say so, is treating Curll as if he was a personal agent who did this and had these opinions, and you don't like it, what he did, and you bring in your own views there. But if you just say, well, here's an economic agent, we don't care anything about his character or his life. He's an economic agent who is finding some way in the circumstances of his age of making a living by moving in and out of various restrictions. Sometimes he may be moving his address, sometimes he may be putting a false title page or whatever it is. But these are the things that can actually be recovered. And I suspect because he operates in that very transitional period, just before and after the act of Queen Anne of 1710, that would answer your question. Why is he unique? Because he's unique because these sets of circumstances didn't exist for much longer after his time. And then you wouldn't have to speculate whether an author collaborated or not. You've got a kind of judgment-free, speculation-free model of looking at this activity. And I think you've probably got enough to enable that to be done.
Well, all that is fair comment. Let me respond to two or three things you said, Ruth. First of all, I don't think he was unique. I've actually written an essay in a book which Ian mentioned to me just before the end on Marriage and Publishers, which is on Curll and the publishing trade. And there I try to show the ways in which he was actually fairly off.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
In terms of the price, his pricing, his scale, his print runs running, you know them, which is not very often. Scale, the amount he published, which was not large, he wasn't the biggest single publisher in output. One of the big ones, one of the biggest. And in several other ways, he's fairly in line with a lot of publishing practice of the day. So I don't mean to suggest that he's in every way unique. That's the first one. As to avoiding legal restrictions and so on, a lot of the things he did were very, very blatant. He did have all sorts of cunning ways of disguising things and doing things surreptitiously. He was very good at that at times. But some of the things he simply ignored and trusted to people either backing down or not having strong case. When he gets into cases, chancery cases such as the case of Pope versus Curll, or 4 or 5 others, he usually argues with great vigour and trenchantly that the Copyright Act has been misinterpreted, that it does not give the coverage thought to. And one of the things he does is argue, for instance, that translations, this was debated, sometimes this was not known which case initially. He argues that abridgments are not covered, and therefore he can abridge our work, but it's not reprinting it. And this again is not absolutely straightforward law straight away. He loses a lot of these cases, in fact, but not all. And even in the case of Pope's letters, of course, when through the Pope's friends and Rathhurst and people, the matter came before the House of Lords, Lord Delaware brought it up, the question of Pope's letters as being an infringement of, I think it was just an order of the House in 1721-22, that peers, the writings of peers, could not be reprinted without permission of the House of Lords. It was a breach of their privilege. A different area of law, of course, privilege law. This was lost. He did not succeed in that claim.
These are examples of what I was suggesting, because he kind of found these various loopholes of uncertainty in the law. But shortly after he stopped operating, most of those were closed, either legally or by other forms. So you don't get this anarchic book industry by the middle or later part of the 18th century. It's all nicely tidied up. Yeah.
But of course,
so he's a man of his age.
Yeah, liminal to say. Of course, a lot of people were already trying to tie it up and thought it had been tied up and thought it should be taken up further. And this is why this issue of piracy, I think, is, which Brian Redson, I should perhaps say a little bit more about. People thought it was a pirate at the time, not so much as the 19th century believed this, the Victorians thought that this was his main stock in trade. I think it is true to say that he didn't need to pirate a lot of his stuff. It was not really contested or in dispute. My own belief is this, I cannot prove now, is that he had various literary scavengers, of whom the most important item was Richard Rawlinson, the Oxford Jacobite, non-Jordan bishop, book collector, brother of Thomas Rawlinson. And there's several, I think, very strong pointers in this direction. I can't prove it, but they include the fact that Rawlinson is constantly editing things and querying works for Curll at the same time, and they're in correspondence. They go on an antiquarian tour at one point together. But most important, I think, a lot of the the manuscripts for books that Curll produced, translations by Robert Sand and so on, are in Rawlinson's collections. That's where they ended up. And they're among the few manuscripts of Curll books that have survived. Not necessarily printed copies, but they are the basis, the manuscript basis for Curll printed books. And the only large source of those are Rawlinson's own collections. So I think he obviously had a man who went down to Doctor's Commons and read all the latest wills, because that was legal, and what you could do. So if you wrote down, Lady Delaware has left £180 to the lover, and did it next week. So he had somebody down at Doctor's Commons to give him wills. I think he had 2 other people problem, but I think that Rawlinson was a snapper up of unconsidered trifles in the literary and particularly the Oxford community. And so he publishes a lot more Oxford things than Cambridge things. Somebody there was feeding him the stuff. And in a way this was kind of uncontested. The literal position maybe wasn't exactly that we now have a Copyright Act and we have still trying to enforce the Stations Party, the Green and the Twain. We have various kinds of parliamentary measures like the breach of privilege thing. And on the surface things are getting tighter. It seems to me for anyone who had enough confidence and chutzpah and willingness to risk facing the law, as good, you could get away with a very great deal. So it's not as far on the road as perhaps the official institution history would suggest. The last point, I'll just touch on this, about situating you economically. We will do this as far as we can. Paul and I listed in the biography of Curll.
Is there a will of Curll?
Sorry?
Curll's will? Do you have
yes,
that?
we have a will, but it's unreal. Figures not coming.
No estate at death, as in the ODNB?
No. What's the saying?
Sorry, economic.
Oh, yeah. We listed all the sort of surviving payments that we know of. Where we know the cost of printing, which I think is about 2 out of these 1,200, we would record that. Say what the payments were, the price, which of course Strauss doesn't give the price in every case.
Yeah.
And that sometimes also leads to illustration. One of the main things I haven't forgot to say earlier, before we stop I should say, is the extraordinary longevity of his list. He advertises unsold copies, not at reduced prices usually, for 30 years. So that he publishes
That's
a
not just the
non-dispute.
18th century, even a lot of the 19th century. Most have books in print, sometimes 30 or 40 years since the first.
What's that case? It's in the history of Oxford University Press, Harry Carter's. They produced an Armenian grammar or something in 1694. You know the case? And it was still in print in 1820, and they sold 47 copies or something.
And the sacred books
I've got those exact figures.
in print for 100 years.
But anyway, even books that apparently never did very well are liable after a long gap. As well, you see, he'll publish something in 1713, push it for a while, it'll appear in newspaper ads, it'll appear, a large amount of it, as versions, of course, is in books themselves. At the end of his books, or in Miller's books, he has his own books himself. It'll be there for a few months, a year, sometimes, not usually. It'll disappear for 20 years. He'll suddenly start advertising again. And of course, he has these catalogues. We haven't talked about that, but it's a big catalogue. And anything that actually, I think, he'd ever sold that he'd not sold out of, if he had one remaining copy, put that in his catalogue.
So I haven't found any years he used this lining of trunks or book.
He must have had a big warehouse, though. Did his warehouse, did it move around from premise to premise?
Particularly as also so many of his books are these, council title pages, which are just the sheets. So I must have kept those around.
Kept the sheets.
They're not normally reset. Occasionally,
Yeah.
there's some evidence of something we've done.
You should be able to get at that, because if you've got cost prices, as you say, cost of printing, cost of the final cost of paper, and you've got retail final price, then you've got the gross
In that case, we don't have
cost,
that.
and there's various ways in which that
We don't have that.
Do you know?
I thought you said you had some cost of printing.
About one or two.
One or two is
I
enough.
don't think paper came into that.
But you can find paper from other.
Well, it might be possible. I think it'd be interesting stuff. I don't think that's one of the more immediately productive areas, because I don't think it's very much evidence. I'm not poo-pooing what I'm talking about.
No, I'm just trying to push you. You've got to gather all this information. I want to push you to get the maximum out of it.
I think it's so big and so important, it really requires a new project.
Yeah.
God knows we spent long enough on this. We spent plenty of time on the biography. This in itself is really almost beyond my powers. I don't know that I'll finish it, get done in my lifetime. It's certainly the biggest enterprise I've ever taken in my life by a long way. And the sheer volume of data, unprocessed data, to get in without interpreting it at all, it's just so huge. I don't really start with such a...
Do you know the print runs for most of these
Many
books?
few cases, mostly not.
Is there a standard pattern, or does it depend?
These popular pamphlets will be up to 1,000.
Right.
More common, I think, is antiquarian books, probably 400 or 500, which again you stick a long time to unload. And you repackage it in ways of giving more collective types and trying someone's job a lot.
So at any one time, say in the middle of his career, or 2/3 of the way through his career, he's got unbound sheets for, let's say, 300 books.
Possibly.
Lying around in a warehouse. It must have. You're complaining about data. Just think of this problem. How did he keep tabs on all of that?
Because he always tells people to go to his retail bookshop. But there's a mysterious thing in the early 1731 which some of these American scholars have written about, called the literatori. How do you pronounce it? Literatori. And this, I think, was in Bow Street when his main retail outlet was on the other side of Covent Garden in King Street. It's just north of Covent Garden. It's 200 yards away. And they speculated that it was a kind of book club from near First Street, and was a kind of meeting house, or almost like a coffee house without a coffee. I see no evidence of this really. I think it was a kind of overflow warehouse. And they have sent people to just grab that. How many assistants were having down there? He had the only definite, well, he did two little interesting stuff very quickly. One is that in the early 1730s, just about the time he suddenly engages with a man otherwise unknown to history, who I've tracked him down this sort of ruling. He was a mercer, and I think he was in the Strand, and he may either own the shop goes in the one on the Strand, or next door shop. His name is and this only lasted for a few months, but this is a man completely outside the trade whose name suddenly appears in the imprints, presumably because he's put money into the business. This disappears again. However, the only other thing I know about his colleagues directly, apart from his son and his wife, in the, when was this? Yes, in the early 1730s, there is a terrible case of a girl who was a 16-year-old girl, I think, who was a girl servant who was charged with stealing books from a bookstore in Congo. And it was proved. I think it was commuted to transportation and she may have been sent to town. And Curll basically chopper, I think, but he did not speak up in her defense. And she was his 16, I think he was a maid servant rather than book service assistant. Yeah. So there was a maid in the place, there was a wife and a son, the wife most of the time, and the son until he died. I don't know that there was any other long-term assistant working in the shop there. But he may have had porters to confect sheets. We know that in his chancery suit brought against him a guy called Charles Davies, who was a publisher partly of antiquarian books and other things. Sorry, Curll sued him. And there's a story of a barrel load of books being crowded through the streets in TikTok or something. So there's a certain amount of porters to and fro and just shipping books around central London. So,
if you identify the printers, some of them might be members of the stationers.
something said, what?
Is that right? Yeah, so there is, as you implied, quite a lot of shutting of eyes going on here, turning the sun.
Yeah. I can, yeah.
Quite apart from there being a market for this, and presumably the people who bought this stuff are also members of the stationers company, nurses.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I can't reliably identify many printers. In some cases, the printer is dated. Maybe John Knox is on the we do know it is. Others, there may be some reference in correspondence, or it may come out when Curll is examined by the Secretary of State. In most cases, there isn't really a recognisable Curll House style. Bowyer certainly would be the oldest, certainly worked with once or twice. I was hoping that we'd be able to identify from printing ornaments more than I'd be able to do again. It would take years to do stuff very thoroughly. Maybe Richardson once or twice, not often certainly. So usually, I honestly don't know the identity of the printer. It would be nice. It would be nice to have a kind of real Curll. You can occasionally look at a book which people suggested is Curll's, and you can say, just does it. That is not a Curll book. It just does not look like a Curll book. But that's the exception. And mostly just, I think, opportunistically used in printers are available. Probably in bigger works he may have used more than one printer.
Do you have facsimiles of the title pages of any of the books in the catalogue?
We could put, we haven't got a catalogue yet. It's now, all it is now is draft indexes and draft sections.
Yes, okay.
We haven't got that stage because I haven't completed. The silly reason I won't go into why there are indexes before final numbers, but the consequence is that all the numbers in the indexes are going to have to be renumbered because I'm taking out 37A and things. There is a logic in why I didn't, and it can be done fairly mechanically. But there isn't really a catalogue, so all suggestions are welcome about what could go in, considering facsimiles. They're not usually tremendously unorthodox title pages. They are those of the age. They're inventive in putting in big letters the name of anybody who writes 2 lines in the book. And you can see it in small, tiny type, very small font. People really did it. But they're not very special. So, like, any advice on what should go in?
Well, no, I was just thinking, while I totally agree that something like this should be in print form, because no way you can cross-reference on-screen material if you're going up and down. Even keeping tabs open within the same document is a nightmare. There might be a case for having a website, if you could find some munificent university, with all the title pages scanned. Because you will never know what future scholars might be able to do with this evidence. And, someone in a rare library somewhere in Yugoslavia or Canada or might be able to identify a book.
This is not expensive. The company that I'm the chair of, Open Book publishes in both formats, both as a proper codex and write-on, and as online. So you could read it and search online, which you can't do with the book very easily. But there are also associated pages which are called resources, where you can just put in anything you like, And if you put in all the ornaments, I'm sure there would be some
Yeah.
nerd somewhere who would immediately say that I recognise that ornament as coming.
That's worth
So,
knowing.
so,
I'm asking,
yeah.
I'm saying asking more about that. That's
Yeah,
worth
sure.
knowing.
It's the
Yeah, well, that's marvellous. This is the
I
kind
don't know. This is the most
resource that we should be exploiting.
This is the most magnificent university, all the way down in touch. And how much that applies anywhere
Not for
in the next
much
few
longer.
years, I have no idea. My own university is taking very big steps.
Well, this, if you want to write to me, we don't actually require any subsidy for the course because the costs are actually very small. If the author does all the work, the costs of manufacturing a printed book to a high standard are peanuts. A pound or something.
We should tell that the publishers are rejecting our books.
Yeah, they're not rejecting on the grounds of the manufacturing cost.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so we're moving on to another area, but we're going to have to talk about this.
But this is a crucial academic issue because I know many colleagues, who submit a book which will come out at 210 pages, and the publisher comes back and says, no, we can't handle anything more than 186 pages. So there is some
typical academic monograph, Cambridge Press, Oxford Press, London Press, it's 500 copies, selling at about £60.
That's right.
And of those 500, 300 go to a number of well-endowed universities, mainly in North America, maybe Europe, and then they're borrowed by less than somewhere between 5 and 10 people. And the cost of one act of reading, which is manuals, cannot be less than about £10,000 each act of reading. Now, if you move to a more modern form of publication, you get first of all, the retail price that have been £60 is more like £20.
Yeah.
And you can correct any errors immediately just by joining the PDF. You have all these other
I'm glad because we raised that because I was going to ask before we ended.
So look at our website.
What people think in general about principle of doing online against print.
Because a bibliography for this cries out to be amended, doesn't it? I mean, it's going to be perfect the day you send it to the printer.
Absolutely.
But within a short time, you're going to wish to add or change the date.
But what do you do? Wait forever and never do it?
No, you won't. You have to have a digital form.
That's a big issue. Another big issue across my mind about the ESTC, which my past I've been involved with. You see 60 books not listed in the ESTC.
Not books, I mean editions.
Or editions. Now, ESTC has been in existence 30 years. Is this a bit of a scandal that it's still missing that number, or are they really obscure locations?
Yeah, a lot of them are.
Sorry?
A lot of them are obscure locations. The variants are, pretty slender in many cases. I mean, the number that are really completely unknown books that don't exist in any form of STC is much, much lower.
Will you communicate your list to ESDC? Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly.
But EST is only still a fragment of what once existed. So we don't particularly. So that's why you get these very progressive curves, because so much to be lost.
I didn't mention.
So if you could find, as it were, some ratio of survivability of STC at this period, that could be then projected back to get much more than just curve.
That's another point. I should have added, as against all this huge number we think ghosts, there are a very small number of books recorded as closed and published, for which no copies are pronounced, but I believe did exist.
Yeah. We want those.
But that's a very much smaller number than ghosts.
So those are in your index?
Yeah.
No copies survive? Good.
Not just an index in the main.
Oh, it's
So,
sorry, I missed
yeah.
in the catalogue. Yeah.
I wonder if I could draw a formal proceedings to a close, because unfortunately I have to go to another meeting. Could I start by thanking your two interlocutors who have added to what was a bit at the end, but have added to what for me was a fascinating talk. I'm sure they would certainly agree. And so we ought especially to thank our speaker, who's been an excellent visiting professorial fellow for the school. I hope you've enjoyed your time with us and that it's been profitable. And thank you so much for today's lecture and run through of your catalogue. It's absolutely fascinating. Thank you, shall we?